Many people who identify as empaths don't arrive at that sensitivity by accident. It often begins very early, in environments where emotional attunement was not reliably available. When a child grows up feeling emotionally alone, something essential is missing: not food, not shelter, not even love in the conventional sense, but emotional safety and resonance. And the child adapts. Many people who identify as highly empathic believe this sensitivity is simply who they are. They may have been told they are naturally intuitive, deeply feeling, unusually perceptive. While that may be true, it often misses a more important truth for many empaths. Empathy was not chosen, it was learned. And it was learned early, in response to emotional conditions that required it. When a child grows up in an environment where emotional attunement is inconsistent, unpredictable, or absent, the nervous system adapts. The child begins to pay close attention to tone of voice, facial expressions, shifts in mood, silences. This attentiveness is not curiosity, it is vigilance. It is the body asking, am I safe right now? And what do I need to do to stay connected? For a child, connection is survival. Emotional closeness with caregivers regulates the nervous system, provides a sense of safety, and supports healthy development. When that closeness feels uncertain, the child compensates by becoming exquisitely aware of others' internal states. They learn to anticipate needs before they are spoken, to sense tension before it erupts, to adjust themselves to maintain harmony. Empathy becomes a way to reduce threat and preserve attachment. Over time, this outward focus becomes automatic. The child does not experience it as effort, it simply feels like being sensitive. But beneath the sensitivity is a pattern shaped by necessity. The child's own emotions may have felt overwhelming, unacknowledged, or unwelcome, so attention shifted away from the self and toward others. The body learned that safety lives outside, not inside. As adults, these individuals often remain highly empathic, but the original purpose of that empathy is rarely examined. They may feel responsible for others' feelings, uncomfortable prioritizing their own needs, or anxious in emotionally ambiguous situations. What looks like a personality trait is often a nervous system, still organized around early survival, still scanning, still adapting, still listening outward because that once made connection possible. When a child grows up in an environment where their emotional needs are not consistently met, they learn a quiet but powerful lesson: staying connected requires letting go of parts of themselves. This is not a conscious choice. It is an adaptation shaped by the child's deep dependency on caregivers. When expressing needs leads to withdrawal, irritation, or emotional distance, the child learns to suppress those needs in order to preserve the relationship. Over time, this suppression becomes internalized. The child stops noticing what they feel or want, not because those needs disappear, but because attending to them feels unsafe. Instead, they become attuned to what others expect, prefer, or tolerate. They learn to be easy, agreeable, undemanding. They learn that love arrives when they are helpful, quiet, or self-sufficient. As adults, this early adaptation often masquerades as maturity, kindness, or emotional strength. Self-abandonment feels familiar, and familiarity can feel like love. Many people mistake the absence of conflict for intimacy, or the act of accommodating others for emotional closeness. They may feel most valued when they are needed, relied upon, or emotionally available, even at great personal cost. These adults often struggle to identify where they end and others begin. Saying no may bring up disproportionate guilt or anxiety. Asking for support can feel embarrassing or dangerous. There may be a persistent belief that having needs will burden others or risk rejection. As a result, they continue to prioritize harmony over honesty, connection over authenticity. What makes this pattern so enduring is that it once worked. Self-abandonment helped maintain attachment when the child had no other options. The nervous system learned that minimizing the self preserved belonging, but in adulthood, the same pattern can lead to exhaustion, resentment, and relationships that feel unbalanced or unfulfilling. Love becomes something that must be earned through sacrifice rather than something that allows for presence, truth, and mutual care. Many adults who feel overly responsible for the emotions of others are not responding to the present moment alone, but to an earlier emotional landscape where tension felt dangerous and emotional stability depended on their awareness. As children, they may have lived with caregivers who were emotionally volatile, overwhelmed, distant, or unpredictable. In such environments, the child learns that shifts in mood matter and that being attuned is essential. The child begins to monitor emotional cues constantly. A raised voice, a sigh, a change in energy can trigger an internal response to intervene, appease, or fix. This is not manipulation or control, but an attempt to restore safety. When emotional disruption threatens the sense of connection, the child steps in, often at the expense of their own experience. Over time, this emotional monitoring becomes internalized as responsibility. The child assumes that harmony depends on their actions, their words, their emotional labor. If someone is upset, the child feels compelled to soothe. If someone is uncomfortable, the child feels at fault. The boundary between self and other becomes blurred because emotional survival once required it. In adulthood, this pattern often persists unconsciously. These individuals may feel anxious when others are distressed, even when the distress has nothing to do with them. They may rush to solve problems that are not theirs, take on emotional weight that does not belong to them, or feel guilty for setting limits. Emotional independence in others can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. This hyper-responsibility is often praised as empathy or kindness, yet it carries a hidden cost. Constantly managing others' emotional states leaves little room for one's own feelings to emerge. The body remains in a state of vigilance, prepared to respond to emotional threat rather than grounded in self-awareness. What appears to be deep care for others is often rooted in an early belief that emotional safety is fragile and must be actively maintained. The nervous system learned that peace depends on personal intervention and that letting others feel their own emotions without interference risks disconnection or danger. When a child's emotional experience is not consistently recognized or welcomed, the body learns to retreat from awareness. Feelings that are ignored, minimized, or met with discomfort do not disappear, but they lose their sense of safety. The child adapts by shifting attention away from internal sensations and toward the external world, where connection feels more controllable. This disconnection is not a failure of awareness, but a protective response. If noticing hunger, fear, sadness, or anger does not lead to care or relief, the body learns that paying attention inward is pointless or even painful. Over time, the child becomes skilled at functioning while disconnected from their own physical and emotional signals. They may appear capable, resilient, or independent while remaining cut off from their internal guidance system. As adults, this pattern often shows up as difficulty identifying feelings or needs. When asked how they feel, they may pause, intellectualize, or describe what they think they should feel rather than what they are experiencing. Physical cues such as tension, fatigue, or discomfort are often overridden in favor of meeting expectations or maintaining emotional harmony with others. Many of these individuals are deeply attuned to the sensations and emotions of those around them, yet unfamiliar with their own bodily signals. The body may be experienced as something to manage rather than listen to. Rest feels unearned. Slowing down can create unease. There may be a chronic sense of disconnection that is difficult to name but ever present. This separation from the body has consequences. Without access to internal cues, boundaries become difficult to sense and assert. Needs are recognized only when they reach a point of exhaustion or overwhelm. The nervous system remains oriented outward, scanning for emotional cues rather than settling into self-awareness. What looks like strength or selflessness often reflects a long-standing adaptation to emotional neglect. The body learned early that safety and belonging existed outside the self, and that turning inward risked disappointment or invisibility, so attention stayed external while the inner world waited quietly to be noticed. For many people who grew up without consistent emotional safety, calm connection was not the norm. Instead, relationships were marked by emotional highs and lows, unpredictability, or moments of closeness followed by withdrawal. In such environments, intensity became the most recognizable signal of connection. Strong emotions, whether positive or painful, at least meant engagement, and engagement felt better than emotional absence. As children, these individuals may have learned that attention arrived during moments of crisis, conflict, or heightened emotion. Calm, steady presence was rare or fleeting. The nervous system adapted by associating emotional intensity with closeness and emotional neutrality with distance. Over time, this association became embedded at a physiological level. In adulthood, this pattern often leads to a confusion between intensity and intimacy. Relationships that are dramatic, emotionally charged, or unstable can feel compelling and meaningful, even when they are exhausting or harmful. The emotional swings feel familiar, and familiarity can be mistaken for love. Conversely, relationships that are consistent, gentle, and emotionally regulated may feel flat, boring, or lacking depth. This is not a conscious preference for chaos, but a nervous system seeking what it knows. Calm connection can feel unfamiliar or even threatening when the body has learned to stay alert. Without emotional turbulence, there may be a sense of emptiness or disconnection, not because the relationship lacks intimacy, but because intimacy without intensity is new territory. People caught in this pattern may find themselves repeatedly drawn to emotionally unavailable or volatile partners. They may interpret anxiety as passion, urgency as attachment, and emotional pain as proof of caring. Stability, on the other hand, may evoke restlessness or doubt. What is often overlooked is that true intimacy is built through consistency, emotional safety, and mutual presence. When intensity is mistaken for intimacy, the nervous system remains in survival mode, seeking stimulation rather than connection, repeating early emotional dynamics in the hope of finally feeling met, even as the body stays alert, braced, and waiting for the next emotional shift. For those who learned early to orient themselves around the emotional states of others, turning empathy inward can feel unfamiliar and even unsettling. Empathy was developed as a way to maintain connection, not as a tool for self-understanding. Attention flowed outward because that is where safety once lived. Redirecting that awareness toward the self may initially bring discomfort, confusion, or resistance. Turning empathy inward begins with noticing rather than fixing. Instead of immediately responding to others' emotions, there is an invitation to pause and sense what is happening internally. This might include physical sensations, emotional shifts, or subtle impulses that were long ignored. For many, this awareness has been absent for so long that it emerges slowly in fragments and without clear language. Self-directed empathy challenges deeply held beliefs. Many people unconsciously associate self-attention with selfishness or disconnection. They may fear that prioritizing their own experience will result in rejection or abandonment. These fears are rooted in early experiences where the self was not welcomed or supported. Healing requires recognizing that these fears belong to the past, even though they still feel present in the body. As empathy turns inward, boundaries begin to form naturally. Instead of being imposed through effort or justification, limits arise from an internal sense of capacity and need. The individual starts to recognize when something feels overwhelming, draining, or misaligned. This awareness allows for choice rather than automatic accommodation. With practice, self-empathy creates a different internal relationship. The person learns to respond to their own distress with the same curiosity and compassion they readily offer others. Emotions are no longer problems to solve or suppress, but signals to attend to. Over time, this inward attention helps regulate the nervous system, reducing the constant vigilance that once felt necessary. Healing through inward empathy does not diminish sensitivity to others. It restores balance. Empathy becomes a shared resource rather than a one-sided offering, allowing connection to emerge from presence rather than self-erasure. And perhaps the most radical thought of all for the empath, who once felt emotionally alone, is this: I don't have to be needed to be worthy. I don't have to suffer to belong. I am allowed to take up space. That is not selfishness. That is healing. And healing, in the end, is not about becoming someone new. It's about finally allowing yourself to be who you always were, without being alone.